Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere very old, older than pharaohs, older than Plato, older even than the concept of weekends. You're standing barefoot on the cracked earth of a place called Sumer, sometime around 3100 BCE. The air smells like wet clay and sheep, and the sun is doing that thing where it both burns your face and makes your eyelids heavy. Somewhere nearby, someone is yelling about missing barley, and a little kid is crying because he dropped his date cake in a canal. You're not here to fight in a war or discover a lost city. Nope. Tonight, you're here to learn something even more soul-soothing. How humans invented the tax receipt. Yes, taxes. Humanity's favorite tradition, older than bread and just as dry. You're going to witness the quiet triumph of clay over chaos, the birth of bureaucracy. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this version of tax season, unless you're good at hauling sacks of grain and nodding respectfully at gods carved from limestone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know your location and local time in the comments. Always curious who's falling asleep to Sumerian economics at 3 a.m. from across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a dusty footpath outside the ancient city of Uruk. Your feet leave faint prints in the clay, still damp from last week's canal overflow. Off to the side, a shepherd waves lazily at you from under a palm tree. His goats bleating in low, annoyed tones. Probably something about the rising price of hay. The walls of Uruk loom ahead, but they're not imposing in the way later castles would be. They're made of sun-baked mud brick, soft at the corners and patched by hand. They're more practical than majestic. You notice a curious symbol pressed into the brick near the gate. A line, a wedge, a half moon. You'll learn later that it's not art. It's administration. It's a name, a label, a mark of ownership. You've just met the ancestor of your tax form. You pass through the gate and into a low humming bustle. People bartering, children running. Someone off-key on a reed flute. The streets are narrow, winding, and somehow both dusty and sticky at once. Everything smells vaguely of fish, ash, and hot stone. You'd think a society this old would be primitive, but these people are surprisingly organized. And the reason you're about to learn is taxation. See, in a land where rainfall is a myth and river flooding is your only hope, organization is life. And organizing people means tracking what they owe. Especially when you're trying to feed a city full of scribes, soldiers, and temple workers who don't grow their own food. Historians still argue whether the earliest taxation was truly forced, or more like a ritual gift to the gods and their priestly accountants. But either way, you see it in motion here. Farmers lining up outside a temple granary, each with a sack of barley on their back and an expression somewhere between reverence and resentment. A bearded man in a fringed tunic checks off their names. Not on a scroll, not in ink, but with little balls of clay. No, really. Each taxpayer hands over a clay token. A cone for sheep, a sphere for barley, a disc for beer. It's like a very ancient game of Monopoly, except instead of buying hotels, you're desperately trying to avoid divine punishment for underpaying. The tokens are dropped into a hollow clay ball called a bulla. Once the day's taxes are collected, the bulla is sealed shut and pressed with a mark. Maybe a temple stamp or the personal seal of the collector. That's it. That's the receipt. You think about how easy it would be to fake that system. Just crack open the bulla, take out a token, and seal it again, right? But clay doesn't lie, and people here are suspicious. Tampering with a bulla is considered a big deal, like crashing your chariot into the temple gate on purpose. Nobody wants to be caught with one that doesn't match the records. Still, the system isn't perfect. You see a man arguing with a priest near the back of the line. He insists he brought 2 sheep last month and should only owe 1 today. The priest raises an eyebrow, then turns to a clay tablet. On it are rows of tiny wedge marks, cuneiform. It's messy but legible if you're trained. And it says, "No sheep." The man sighs and drags 2 bleeding animals forward. The priest nods, and the man receives a fresh clay token. You watch it slide into a newly formed bulla. He'll keep that ball like a precious document. If the taxman comes again and says, "Where's your proof?" He can toss that hardened lump of bureaucracy on the table and say, right here. Mainstream historians agree that this token system, evolving around 3400 BCE, was humanity's first attempt at abstract record-keeping. It allowed people to trade without immediately handing things over, to prove debts, and, most importantly, to remember. But here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Some of those sealed bullies still exist today. Archaeologists have x-rayed them like little ancient Kinder eggs, and sure enough, the tokens are still inside, perfectly preserved. Someone forgot to open them or didn't need to. Or maybe, just maybe, they were buried during a tax audit and no one wanted to bring them up again. As you wander back out of the temple yard, you notice another line forming. This time, it's just kids carrying reed bundles. A priest hands them a small clay square with scribbles on it. You recognize it, your first look at a receipt. And somehow, even 5,000 years ago, it still looks vaguely accusatory. You follow the kid with the reed bundles as he trots home, clay receipt in hand like it's the most serious document on earth. Probably is. If he loses it, his family might get called back to the temple to explain themselves. Again, the thing is, in ancient Mesopotamia, forgetting your receipt isn't just annoying, it's borderline heresy. You veer off the path and cut through a patch of tilled fields. The sun's mellowing a bit now, and the air smells warm and sweet, like sun-baked wheat and dry herbs. You're surrounded by waist-high barley, swaying in that oddly hypnotic way fields do when you're just tired enough to notice. You're about to witness how grain, simple, unassuming grain, became the backbone of taxation. You duck under a rope fence made of knotted palm fiber and find yourself walking alongside a farmer named Adamu. He's got a curved sickle hanging from one belt and a very serious expression on his sun-worn face. He doesn't say much, but he does let you tag along as he checks his barley stores. Adamu's house isn't much. Mud brick walls, a thatched roof, a curious chicken that seems more nosy than afraid. But the back room is what matters. It's filled, floor to ceiling, with clay jars of grain. And every jar has a dab of hardened clay on the front, marked with a symbol and, this is key, a number. You ask how much he has stored. He shrugs, grabs a stick, and starts poking through a basket until he finds a tablet the size of your palm. More cuneiform marks, slightly smudged but still legible. You're looking at his home copy of what he owes. This is how taxes work in Mesopotamia. A set percentage of your harvest goes to the temple. Sometimes it's paid in kind: grain, goats, woven cloth. Other times, if you're flush, you can pay in silver or beer. Yes, beer. And yes, it had a standard rate. The important thing is that you pay something and that you have proof. Otherwise, the collectors come back with questions. And no one wants to reweigh their entire barley hoard under the watchful eye of a priest with a stick and a superiority complex. Historians still argue whether these taxes were strictly mandatory or more like ritualized offerings with strong social pressure. Some inscriptions call it the king's share or Enlil's portion, which sounds religious but hits suspiciously close to your paycheck just got garnished. You ask Adamu what happens if you don't pay. He pauses, looks around, and whispers, "They send the goat counters." That's not a joke. The goat counters, low-level temple officials, wander the village making notes, tracking livestock, and occasionally confiscating a stray animal for back taxes. It's like a door-to-door census, but fuzzier and way more judgmental. You follow Adamu to the nearby temple storehouse. A small crowd is already there. Women with jugs of oil, an old man with a squealing pig, two teens arguing over whether beans count as a luxury good. Everyone's lined up in front of a long clay platform where 3 scribes sit, each with a reed stylus and a tablet balanced on their knees. When Adamu reaches the front, he bows his head respectfully. A scribe takes one look at the token he presents and holds out his hand. Adamu pours a measured quantity of barley into a large jar marked with a god's name, Nesaba, goddess of writing and accounting, if you were wondering. The scribe then scribbles into wet clay, "Adamu, field 3, 1 bushel, payment complete." And then, this is where it gets satisfying. He hands Adamu a square of clay with a matching record. That's it. That's the receipt. And yes, it still smells faintly of river mud and sheep. You step back to let the next person approach. A woman named Zana bringing for woven mats and a jar of honey. She doesn't get a full receipt, Her donation is listed under temple gifts, which means she might get a blessing in return or just a polite nod. Temple taxes are murky like that, but Zana's not worried. She hands over her goods, smiles at the scribe, and tucks her own little token into a pouch on her belt. She's contributing not just to the temple, but to the system that keeps her village more or less running. The waterworks, the granaries, the seasonal festivals that involve an awkward amount of fluting and dancing in goat masks. It's all funded by taxes. And here's a fun tidbit. Some scholars believe that Mesopotamian taxes were tied to the moon cycle, meaning you paid more during certain months, especially when the gods were feeling dramatic, like, say, during a lunar eclipse, or when a priest had a suspicious dream about a grain shortage. You linger a little while longer watching the scribes at work. One of them, younger than the others, is clearly new. He squints at his tablet, then at a farmer's goat and makes a face. You hear him mutter, "Why does everyone bring goats? I hate drawing goats." It turns out, stylized goat etching is an entire category of accounting training. They take it very seriously. As the sun starts to set, the scribes wrap their tablets in cloth and stack them into baskets. Each basket will be sealed with a clay label indicating the day's date, the category of goods, and the region. The system is weirdly elegant. Clay tokens became bully, bully evolved into tablets, and tablets into full-on archives. You're watching history organize itself. Quietly, patiently, one wedge mark at a time. You head home with Adamu, who looks relieved to be debt-free, at least for this moon cycle. He pats your shoulder and mutters something like, "May your goats remain uncounted." You're not entirely sure, but it sounds like a compliment. You glance at the clay receipt in his hand, still soft at the edges. In a few days it'll harden, then get filed, forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, rediscovered thousands of years later by some archaeologist trying to figure out if the ancient world really was this obsessed with barley. Spoiler, it was. You wake the next morning to the sounds of distant shouting and the clatter of something suspiciously goat-shaped. A rooster, who seems offended that you're still lying down, struts past you with purpose. Adamu's already gone, off to check his irrigation channels, or maybe to avoid the goat counters now roaming the streets with that slightly smug posture unique to people who know they can ruin your day with a clay tablet. You stretch, blink into the morning sun, and decide to follow the noise. You're about to meet a technology so deceptively simple it took millennia to outdo it. The clay token system in its final form, the sealed clay ball. Or, as future archaeologists call it, the bulla. You head toward the temple district again, but this time you're not watching barley being handed over in sacks. No, today's about abstraction. Today is about representing value without carrying a goat through the mud. Near the temple's rear courtyard, a group of scribes sit cross-legged on woven mats, surrounded by little pots of damp clay. You approach just as one of them is demonstrating the whole process to an apprentice. It's a little like watching someone fold origami, but with mud. He begins with a handful of tokens, small shapes baked in bulk and stored in jars. Each shape corresponds to a specific item. A cone for 1 lamb, a sphere for 10 measures of barley, a tetrahedron for 1 jar of oil. It's the ancient equivalent of a grocery barcode, but somehow more adorable. He places the tokens inside a ball of wet clay, smooths it over, then rolls a thin carved cylinder across the surface. This cylinder seal, with its tiny raised images and script, leaves an impression that identifies the sender, kind of like a personal brand logo meets an official rubber stamp. The ball is set aside to dry. Once hardened, it cannot be opened without breaking. That's the point. You can't cheat the system without getting caught red-handed or red-clayed, as it were. You pick up a bulla from the finished pile. It's surprisingly light, about the size of a small orange, and oddly satisfying to hold. On its surface, you see rows of symbols pressed in a careful line. One looks like a barley stalk, another like a fish, another like someone tried to draw a goat mid-sneeze. It's charmingly bad, but gets the point across. This little object is a contract, a record, a tax receipt, and a portable filing cabinet, all rolled into one. You suddenly feel a little bad for every modern receipt you've ever crumpled up and ignored. But it gets more interesting. The scribe shows you an older bulla, dried, cracked, and partially broken. Inside, the tokens are still visible, each nestled snugly in its clay casing. If we forget the surface, the scribe says, the truth is still inside. That line sticks with you. The idea that memory isn't just written. It's buried, sealed, preserved. And in Mesopotamia, where floods come quickly and fire comes often, sealing a record inside a hard shell is both brilliant and poetic. Historians still argue whether this token tabula system was purely for taxes or also used in trade. Some say it was a temple tool, others insist merchants used them too. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, a sacred form of everyday bureaucracy. You wander further into the archive building. It's cool inside, and the walls are lined with shelves of tablets and bully. It smells like old dust, warm clay, and faintly of incense. In one corner, a scribe carefully etches the contents of a bulla onto a flat tablet. An external summary, in case the outer surface wears away. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some scholars believe that actual writing, may have started because people got tired of carrying bully everywhere. Eventually, they realized, hey, instead of putting the tokens inside the ball, what if we just drew the tokens on the outside? And boom, cuneiform was born. The first true written language. Just so people could remember that Zuzu paid his fish tax and didn't owe another 3 carp. Back in the courtyard, a commotion breaks out. One of the apprentices dropped a half-dried bulla into a puddle. The clay smeared, the seal rolled off unevenly, and now no one can tell whose tax it represents. You watch 3 scribes argue about whether it was the goat payment from that farmer with the limp or the honey jars from the woman who talks too fast. Eventually, they just redo it. Another bulla, another set of tokens. Nobody wants to risk an audit, after all. You realize that even in a society without calculators, people are very aware of the importance of backup records. You sit with the scribes a while longer, watching them chat idly between bully. One is carving his name onto the handle of his stylus. In case someone steals it, he mutters. Another is sketching what looks like a very dramatic chicken onto the edge of his clay palette. For flair, he shrugs. It hits you how human this all is. Yes, it's ancient. Yes, it's unfamiliar. But it's also deeply relatable. People are managing inventory. People are logging payments. People are doodling chickens when bored at work. Some things never change. Before you go, the lead scribe presses a freshly made bulla into your palm. For learning, he says. It's warm from the sun and faintly sticky. You don't know what's inside. Could be goat tokens or barley or something entirely made up to keep an apprentice busy. But you hold it like it matters, because somehow it does. The next few days drift by in a rhythm that's both strangely soothing and occasionally sticky, like the mud under your sandals that never quite washes off. You spend your time between temple courtyards, granaries, and the quieter corners of the scribe schools, where you've now become something of a tolerated curiosity. A few of the younger apprentices try to teach you cuneiform, and while you manage to draw something that vaguely resembles a bird, the others assure you it more closely resembles a broken sandal. You're not offended. Everyone starts somewhere. Today, though, is about the real workhorses of this world, the scribes. Not the high priests or royal officials with flashy seals and lofty titles, but the everyday scribes who sit cross-legged for hours, scribbling into damp clay while trying not to smudge their sleeves. You're about to understand how these quiet, patient individuals revolutionize tax receipts with nothing more than a reed and a slab of earth. You begin your morning by visiting a scribe's home, a humble little structure tucked behind the grain warehouses, with a flat roof, a curtain for a door, and several goats attempting to eat the laundry. Inside, the space is warm and dim. Shelves line the walls, each filled with tablets in various stages of drying, and a single low table bears a stylus carved from reed. It's nothing fancy, just a bit of plant cut into a wedge shape, but it's powerful. This is the tool that will build cities, rewrite economies, and eventually allow us to send emojis. Your host, a scribe named Tilla, waves you in without looking up. He's hunched over a slab of clay, muttering to himself as he tries to make sense of someone's messy tax payment. 2 goats, 1 jar of honey. For what is that? Lumps of resin? Why would you pay taxes in resin? He sighs. Every season, someone tries something weird. Tilla explains that reed styluses are prized possessions. Not just anyone can wield one effectively. The wedge-shaped tip creates distinctive impressions when pressed into clay, marks that form the basis of cuneiform, one of the oldest writing systems in the world. It's not drawing. It's pressing, slicing, tilting. Each mark has intention. Each cluster of marks, a record, an account, promise, or sometimes a very stern warning that you're late on your fish tax. Historians still debate whether cuneiform developed because of taxes or simply grew alongside them, like a vine wrapping itself around necessity. Either way, the correlation is hard to ignore. Some of the oldest known tablets contain tax data, lists of livestock, and temple ration records. You'd like to think writing was born from poetry or epic tales of heroism, but it was mostly math. Math and barley. As Tilla works, you notice a clay tablet he's left on the windowsill to dry. It's unusually ornate, with crisp, clean lines and a seal rolled across the bottom. "Ah," he says, catching you admiring it. "That one's going to the palace. Monthly report. It's got to be perfect." He hands you a simpler tablet to examine. The small, palm-sized, and still soft. On one side, there's a list of numbers, tallies of sheep, barley, possibly a goose. On the other side, the date and location. This is a receipt. Not sealed in a bulla, but recorded directly on clay. This is the next step in the evolution of tax records. Written accounts replacing physical tokens. You sit beside Tilla and try your hand at the stylus again. You press too hard, the clay splits. Press too lightly, nothing shows. It's harder than it looks. He chuckles and says, "That's why people come to us. Not everyone can make a goat look like a goat and fit it into the tax column." Over lunch, flatbread, lentils, and something sweet and sticky that might be figs, you ask why scribes are trusted so much. Why their tablets carry so much weight. Tilla shrugs, wipes his hands, and says, "Because clay remembers, and we remember how to make clay remember." It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? That memory can be molded, shaped, dried, and stored. That someone, somewhere, can check a tablet and say, "Yes, this goat was accounted for." And that's enough to settle a dispute, clear a debt, or end an argument that's lasted since the last lunar cycle. He takes you to the scribe school after lunch, where rows of apprentices practice the same phrase over and over. 10 jars of oil delivered to the temple of Ishtar. The phrase is rhythmic, predictable, and deeply boring, perfect bedtime material. You almost doze off watching the styluses rise and fall in unison like a tiny orchestra of woodpeckers. One apprentice, a boy with wild curls and a smirk, shows you his invention. A faster way to tally large numbers using groupings and shortcuts. Tilla rolls his eyes but doesn't correct him. Let him play. That's how the system grows. And that's the strange beauty of Mesopotamian bureaucracy. It does grow. Not chaotically, but with care. As the population increases, so does the complexity of tax records. The scribes invent new symbols, new abbreviations. Clay ledgers are paired with archive logs. Everything has to be tracked, filed, and, most importantly, retrievable. Your quirky tidbit of the day? Scribes sometimes baked particularly important receipts to make them permanent. Once baked, a clay tablet becomes stone, unalterable. Some were even kept in special jars, labeled and stored in temple libraries. That's right, tax returns 5,000 years ago were getting the VIP treatment. By the end of the day, your hands are sore, your tunic is smeared with clay, and your stylus is definitely broken. But you leave Tilla's home with a deep appreciation for the quiet magic of scribes. They aren't warriors or kings or prophets, but they're the ones who keep everything from falling apart. And as you walk back through the city, the fading sun casting long shadows across the alleyways, you pass a man standing at a stall selling clay styluses, each one neatly bundled and tied with a bit of twine. A group of scribes argue nearby about ink versus clay, and someone's carved a goat into the side of the building just for fun. You smile, because this is how civilization remembers, one wedge at a time. The temple complex is unusually loud today, and not in a sacred chanting, incense-burning, softly reverent kind of way. It's bustling like a marketplace on barley ration day, with villagers moving in and out under the watchful eyes of temple officials and low-ranking scribes who are sweating through their linen robes. You squeeze past a group of nervous-looking shepherds and slip into the shade of a colonnade. You're here for tax day in Uruk, and let's just say, it's not a calm experience. This isn't just any tax day. It's the mid-season reckoning, a monthly ritual when all contributions are tallied, accounted for, and recorded in full to keep the gods content and the scribes mildly overworked. It's also the one day a month when even the most forgetful farmer remembers exactly how many chickens he owns. Funny how tax deadlines do that to people. You tag along behind a woman named Atira, who's lugging a wicker basket filled with squawking, mildly panicked birds. She's already sweating, and you can tell by her expression that she's rehearsing something. Probably an excuse. No, these were all born this week. Maybe. Or, the fox took the rest. I swear on the Temple of Enki. It's a whole vibe. As you enter the outer tax court, the air is thick with dust, clay, and the unmistakable scent of warm poultry. Everyone's waiting to pay their dues to the temple economy, a system so structured it could probably run itself, if not for the fact that every single person insists their goose doesn't count as taxable because it just visits sometimes. Atira reaches the front of the line, hands trembling slightly as she presents her basket and a token from last cycle. A junior scribe inspects both with the indifference of someone who's been comparing poultry for 6 hours. He glances at the chickens, mutters something about weight inconsistencies, and presses a fresh mark into a small clay tablet. Receipt issued. That's how it works here. You bring your goods, grain, animals, oil, textiles, and you receive a tiny clay proof that says, yes, you are in the God's good books, for now. And if you don't, well, best of luck next month when you're behind on your sheep tithe and someone comes knocking. Historians still discuss whether this monthly payment system was purely economic or deeply spiritual. The temple, after all, was not just a place of worship. It was the bank, the warehouse, the court, the spreadsheet, all wrapped into one. Missing a tax deadline didn't just disappoint the bureaucracy, it potentially offended an entire pantheon. As you watch the scene unfold, you notice a surprising detail. Some villagers aren't carrying goods at all. Instead, they hold small tablets or bully representations of past contributions. These people have prepaid, temple frequent flyers, if you will. And while the system technically works on trust, no one's taking chances. Each receipt is checked, verified, and logged anew. You follow a teenage boy named Ilmu who's bringing in a delivery of dried dates and sesame oil. His payment is considered a luxury tax, not essential to temple survival but valuable for offerings and ceremonies. He hands over a sealed clay tablet with a faint seal rolled across its front, showing a lion and a barley stalk. That's my father's mark, he says proudly. We've used the same seal since the floods 2 years ago. The scribe nods, flips through a basket of other tablets, and then stamps Ilmu's new record. As a final gesture, he hands him a second tablet, proof that the transaction happened. You realize then that this is where receipts evolve into something more like double-entry bookkeeping. One copy stays with the temple, the other stays with the taxpayer. Civilization just got slightly more symmetrical. And here's your quirky tidbit for the evening. Some receipts were shaped like animals. That's right, if your payment was goats, your receipt might be a stylized goat-shaped tablet. No functional reason for it, just flair. Some bored scribe somewhere went, "What if I made this look like the thing it's for?" And someone else went, "That's brilliant. Now do one shaped like a cow." That's how you get ancient bureaucracy with a side of art. Atira rejoins you, receipt tucked into her sash, and exhales in relief. "Only 12 more moons," she mutters, "and I'll be caught up." She grins, but you can tell it's the kind of joke born of repeated experience. Her chickens, blissfully unaware of the taxation process, strut in confused circles around the court's edge. You spend the afternoon trailing the scribes as they sort the incoming goods. The grain gets stored in sealed jars, tagged with the donor's symbol. The oil is poured into amphorae lined with waxed cloth. The animals are herded into holding pens, each marked with a rough tablet tied to the gate. You're watching a living inventory system in real time, one that's been refined over generations of trial, error, and probably a lot of goat-related arguments. And the receipts? They're laid out to dry on flat shelves, turned every so often to avoid cracking. Once hardened, they'll be stored in temple archives, sorted by region, date, and payment type. It's astonishing how calm the chaos looks once it's been pressed into clay and left to dry in the sun. As the sun dips below the rooftops of Uruk, casting long shadows through the temple courtyard, a bell rings softly from the inner sanctum. The day's transactions are over. The scribes gather up their tools, wipe clay from their hands, and nod to each other like carpenters finishing a shared bench. You sit quietly on the temple steps as twilight sets in, watching villagers drift home, tired but visibly lighter. There's something oddly beautiful about it all, this cycle of giving and proving and recording. It may seem dry, even boring, but it's also profoundly human. A priest walks past you, eyes twinkling, and says, "Another smooth tax day." You raise an eyebrow and he smirks. "Well, except for the goose incident." He doesn't elaborate. You decide not to ask. The moon rises, big and golden over the rooftops, and you lean back against the cool stone, clay dust still clinging to your tunic, the scent of warm oil and roasted grain still lingering in the air. And you think to yourself, maybe next month I'll prepay. The next morning, the temple courtyard is unusually quiet. You suspect everyone's sleeping off the exhaustion of yesterday's tax day, or maybe just avoiding eye contact with the goat that escaped during the goose incident and still hasn't been caught. You, on the other hand, are wide awake because today you're about to witness something even more stressful than missing a payment. Trying to fake one. You follow a merchant named Baron, a man with sharp eyebrows, expensive sandals, and the unmistakable energy of someone who definitely overpromises and sometimes underdelivers. He's carrying what appears to be a perfectly average clay receipt, and he's strutting toward the temple's secondary tax desk like he owns the place. You tag along casually, just in time to see him slide his little tablet across the low stone table, accompanied by a wide, too sincere smile. Barley tax, fully paid. Just delivering the copy. The scribe on duty raises one unimpressed eyebrow and inspects the tablet. He looks at it. He looks at Baron. Then he looks back at the tablet and frowns. Not a big frown. Just the slight twitch of someone who knows something is off and is about to ruin someone's morning very gently. Without a word, the scribe opens a shallow basket, flips through half a dozen tablets, and pulls one out. Similar size, similar seal, but with different numbers etched into its drying surface. He places both tablets side by side. You lean in to see the difference. Baron's version says, 12 measures of barley delivered. The temple's copy says, 5 measures promised, none delivered. Oops. Historians still argue how common it was for people to fake receipts in early Mesopotamia, but it's clear from the clay archives that some folks definitely tried. Erased tablets, forged seals, even copied wedge patterns. But duplicating cuneiform wasn't easy. One wrong stroke and a trained scribe could spot the lie. Baron, realizing he's been caught, starts explaining. Rapidly. "Oh, that must be my old receipt. I forgot the updated one at home. Probably mixed up in my sandal bag. Happens all the time. I can bring it later." The scribe holds up a hand. He isn't angry. In fact, he's barely awake. He writes something on a fresh tablet, stamps it, and hands it to Baron without a word. "What's this?" Baron asks nervously. The scribe yawns. "Appointment with the temple overseer. Sunset. Bring your real tablet. Or your real barley." And with that, Baron walks off, face pale, probably planning whether it's easier to find the barley, forge a better forgery, or flee the city. You follow the scribe behind the desk, curious how he caught the fake so quickly. He shrugs. Wrong date. Too many barley marks. Signature was crooked. And he smelled like desperation. You ask if punishment for forgery is harsh. The scribe smiles faintly. Not unless he lies twice. First lie gets you a warning. Second lie gets you reciting grain inventories to the priests for a week. He pauses. In Sumerian. You wince. That does sound bad. There's a small back room where questionable receipts are stored for review, kind of like an ancient fraud department. You peek inside and see a few cracked tablets, several fragments that look like someone tried to erase wedge marks with a stick, and even a bulla with a suspiciously loose seal. Each one tagged with a new label, pending verification. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. Some tablets came with a witness list, names of people who were present during the tax transaction. These were literally your backup in case someone claimed your payment never happened. Yes, I paid. Wasn't enough. Yes, I paid, and Botsy the fishmonger saw me do it. Was better. You sit beside the window as the temple slowly reawakens. A young apprentice passes by, holding a stack of receipts and a confused expression. One of these says goats. The other says rocks. The man insists he paid in both. He sighs and disappears into the archive room. The temple cat. Yes, there's a temple cat. Slips past you and hops up on the desk. She stretches, yawns, and knocks a stylus off the edge with deliberate, bureaucratic malice. You're told her name is Tabatu, and she once walked across a drying tablet, leaving paw prints in a barley log. That receipt still exists, framed, and proudly mislabeled as proof of divine interference. By midday, Baron returns, this time with actual barley, 2 big sacks of it. He doesn't speak, just places them down, nods once, and waits for his new receipt. The scribe inspects the grain, makes a few marks, and hands him a fresh, perfectly legitimate tablet. You can keep the old one, the scribe says dryly. Put it in your museum. Baron mutters something like, thank you, and disappears into the heat. You can't help but feel a little sorry for him. Tax panic is apparently a timeless condition. And while this system isn't perfect, clay breaks, seals smudge, goats wander, it works. Because everyone wants it to work. There's something comforting in the clay, in the ritual, in knowing that somewhere, your name and your sheep are officially accounted for. You pass by the storage shelf again and notice a cracked tablet being carefully repaired with river mud and string. A scribe looks up and shrugs. It's from 3 years ago. Not even that important. But still, can't throw away a receipt. And that's what sticks with you. The reverence for record. The idea that memory, once inscribed, matters, whether you're paying in barley or just trying not to get cursed. You walk home through quiet alleys, your feet leaving faint prints in the dust, like soft little signatures on the earth. Maybe that's what receipts are. Just proof that you were here, you did your part, and somewhere in a sunlit archive there's a tablet that says you existed. This morning, instead of shadowing scribes or dodging goats, you're heading someplace a little more architectural. The administrative heart of the temple, the record vault. It's not a vault in the treasure sense, though some of the older scribes treat it like one, but a thick-walled clay brick building at the far end of the temple grounds, cool, quiet, and filled with shelves. Endless, beautiful, dusty shelves. You duck through a low entrance and immediately feel the temperature drop. Inside, it's hushed like a library, only instead of books, the shelves are packed with hardened clay tablets. Some as small as your palm, others the size of a dinner plate. You run your fingers along the edges. They're slightly uneven, hand-shaped, and each one is marked with tiny wedge lines pressed by some long-forgotten reed. A scribe named Eru, who seems to live somewhere between these shelves and his own head, appears from behind a pile of tablets. He's holding a wax cloth used to dust them and squints at you as if you might be here to misfile something. Don't touch the ones with the red marks, he says flatly. Those are mid-audit. I just alphabetized them. You promise not to ruin his system and follow him deeper into the archive. He explains that the record vault is arranged by tax cycle, item type, and contributor region. That means there's an entire wall just for barley contributions, South Fields, month of Tammuz. Another wall for wool, northern pasture dwellers, full moon collections. And yes, someone had to carve every single receipt that sits there, organized with a level of passion that borders on holy. Eru shows you a recent innovation, a shelf system built using stacked amphory jars, each containing a scroll of tablets tied together with palm twine. The scribes call them clay scrolls, which is ironic because they don't scroll, they stack, and they weigh a lot. You pick one up, carefully, and marvel at the fact that this small, dry object contains a record of what a single man paid in sesame oil 7 summers ago. It's dated, signed, sealed, and still legible. No password required. Here's your historical fact of the day. Many of these records use a form of dating tied to the reign of kings, such as year 3 of King Lugal-Zagisai's triumph. That means each tax receipt doubles as a political timestamp, subtly reinforcing who's in charge, even as you're trying to track your lentils. Historians still argue, Eru mutters, whether these date formats were practical or propaganda. I say both. If your taxes are tied to a king's victory, you're less likely to forget who's taxing you. That's one way to stay relevant. You sit on a clay bench and take it all in. The room hums with quiet history. There are thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of receipts here. Barley, fish, goats, linen. Payments made in trust, in fear, in tradition. Some of them are cracked. Some smudged. Some corrected with little arrows scratched in later. But each one is part of a system built on collective memory. You notice something odd. A shelf labeled Seasonal Exceptions contains tablets that record missed or delayed payments, usually due to floods, famine, or goats behaving poorly. Eru reads one aloud, written in a slightly exasperated tone. Received partial wool only. Remaining fleece to be delivered after winter molt. Please no further delays. This is the third promise. That's right, there were extensions, grace periods, negotiations. The system wasn't just rigid. It flexed where it had to. Because as much as the gods demanded order, they also knew about unpredictable weather and stubborn animals. Your quirky tidbit for this hour? Some receipts include emoji-like symbols. A sun for daytime payments? A moon for nighttime deliveries? Yes, night drop-offs were a thing. And even little stars for ceremonial contributions. Decorative? Maybe. But also proof that Mesopotamian scribes had a flair for visual flair long before Unicode. You help Eru reshelve a few tablets, which involves gently rotating each one to avoid edge chipping. You accidentally place one in the wrong basket, and he spots it instantly. This was a goat tithe, he scolds. You put it in with textiles. Do you know what happens when someone thinks a goat is a blanket? You offer a sheepish, pun intended, apology, and he sighs, then softens. Don't worry, happens all the time. One time a student filed a fish log in the festival recipes section. We had roasted eel for 3 months. You make a mental note never to trust festival eel. As the sun begins to lower, long shafts of light slant across the dusty air. Eru lights a small oil lamp and continues his work, humming to himself. A tune you suspect might be based on counting beats, since it always repeats in groups of 6. You leave the vault reluctantly. Something about its dusty calm has grown on you. Outside, the streets are louder, brighter, chaotic again. But inside those walls, the receipts sit in silence. They don't shout. They just remember. And you think maybe that's all any of us really wants, to be remembered accurately. To have someone say, yes, they paid their dues. Yes, they gave what they could. Yes, they were part of this story. You step into the soft warmth of late afternoon, clay dust clinging faintly to your sleeves, and make your way toward the river, already thinking about tomorrow's lesson. How those records move from temple shelf to royal palace, and why a good receipt might just save your life. You're starting to realize that in ancient Mesopotamia, paperwork, well, claywork, wasn't just temple business. It was a matter of survival. Today, you're off to the palace quarter to learn how those humble tax receipts, those dusty little tablets you've been tripping over for a week, could actually decide someone's fate, especially if that someone owed tribute to the king. The palace complex is different from the temple. Less incense, more guards. Less goats, more bricks. The walls are taller, the courtyards wider, and everything smells faintly of polished stone and boiled lentils. You pass through an archway carved with royal symbols. Lions, stars, and the unmistakable wedge shapes of cuneiform phrases. It's clear the king likes to be reminded that he is, in fact, very important. Inside the palace archive building, a man named Uarsin greets you with a kind of regal boredom. He's dressed in fine wool. His beard is oiled and braided, and he's holding a stylus like it's both a weapon and a wand. "You're here for the royal receipts," he says, motioning for you to follow him. "Well, let's see who's trying not to pay their tribute this season." You walk into a side room filled with ledgers, not of gold or jewels, but of barley and sheep. Turns out, kings run on taxes too. And just like the temples, palaces use tablets to track what was owed, what was received, and who was dangerously behind schedule. Uarsin shows you a wall of tablets sorted by province. "This is tribute from the east," he says, tapping a tablet marked with the sign for silver. "And this," he taps another one, thicker with a chipped corner, "is from the south, mostly grain and donkeys. Donkeys are a very loyal currency." You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. "They deliver themselves and reproduce. Show me a silver coin that can do that." Some of the tablets here are sealed with the king's emblem, an official mark shaped like a crescent moon flanked by wheat sheaves. These are high-level receipts, the kind issued to city governors or powerful merchants who pay directly into the royal coffers. And here's your historical fact for the day. Tax receipts didn't just travel up the chain, they flowed down too. If a provincial governor failed to deliver their quota, they had to present their own receipts showing they'd collected everything due. If they couldn't, well, that's where things got interesting. Historians still argue. Uarsin says, whether kings punished missing tribute with exile or execution. I say it depended on how many donkeys you gave him last year. You ask what happens if someone loses their receipt. He gives you a slow blink. Then they better find a very persuasive witness, or a donkey that can talk. You spend the morning reading through a pile of seasonal ledgers. One reads, collected, 40 measures barley, 10 jars oil, 6 lambs. 1 lamb died in transit, replaced upon arrival. Even ancient bureaucracy had fine print. Your quirky tidbit of the day. Some receipts even documented how goods were transported. Sent by river raft. Minor leakage due to crocodile incident. That's right, crocodiles were tax obstacles. Somewhere out there is a long-lost receipt with an asterisk that basically says, sorry, the taxes were eaten. Later, Uarsin shows you something rare. A complaint tablet from a merchant who claimed his tribute was paid, but the palace had lost the receipt. It's polite but passive-aggressive, written in flawless cuneiform with phrases like, I delivered the 10 copper ingots under the 3rd moon, with 3 witnesses and a bull cart. The palace clerk was chewing figs at the time. Surely he remembers. You laugh. Uarsin does not. The palace took that very seriously, he says. We had to cross-check 3 ledgers and a river manifest. In the end, he was right. We made him rewrite the tablet with less sarcasm and filed it. There's a lesson here. Never sass a Mesopotamian king, even politely, unless your backup documentation is airtight. Around midday, you're led to the outer audit court, a shaded portico where palace scribes verify incoming goods. Today, a caravan has arrived from a nearby city-state. Its tribute, clay jars of dates, woven cloth, and 1 extremely anxious ox. Each item is checked, documented, and weighed against last season's records. The scribes move quickly, marking tallies, sealing tablets, issuing receipts. It's bureaucratic choreography. One scribe hums as he works. Another has invented a shorthand symbol for broken jar, repacked. It looks like a squashed fish. You love it immediately. The ox, by the way, is fine. Nervous, but fine. It receives a small pat and a receipt marked with a hoof print. Yes, someone actually pressed the ox's hoof into clay for verification. Proof of payment and possibly the first recorded hoof signature in history. You're told some receipts were made in duplicate for long-distance traders. 1 tablet stayed with the merchant. The other traveled to the palace. If the 2 didn't match upon arrival, well, someone was getting a strongly worded tablet. By late afternoon, you've helped roll a seal or 2 and tried your hand at stamping a receipt. You mess up the date. Uarsin gently takes it from you and says, well, that's now a training tablet. He sets it aside for the apprentices. You feel both humbled and oddly proud. You leave the palace with a new appreciation for the depth of Mesopotamian record-keeping. These people weren't just tallying grain. They were managing a vast, interconnected web of obligations, all enforced not by swords or threats, but by clay. Clay that remembers. Clay that tells stories. As you walk back through the city's western gate, you pass a man shouting about unpaid temple dues. Another insists he gave his fish last week. Ask the scribe, he yells. Ask the cat. She saw me. You smile. Because here, tax isn't just obligation, it's theater. And somewhere in the palace vault, a tiny rectangle of clay is quietly, patiently keeping score. The days in Uruk are beginning to blur together, like soft ripples in a clay bowl. You've now spent time with scribes, priests, merchants, and even the odd nervous ox. But today, you're meeting a different kind of bureaucrat, a traveling collector. Specifically, a field officer who goes to the taxpayers, rather than waiting for them to arrive. His name is Zabani. He wears a short beard, carries 2 clay tablets in a leather sling across his chest, and walks with the measured patience of someone who knows he'll eventually collect everything. The trick, he tells you over a breakfast of stewed lentils and garlic flatbread, is to remember everyone lies a little, but clay doesn't. You set out with him toward a smaller farming village on the city's edge. It's a journey of several hours under a hazy morning sky, with dust on your sandals and the distant sound of irrigation wheels clacking like sleepy metronomes. Along the way, Zabani points out various landmarks. An old storage silo once overrun by birds, a collapsed barley shed, and the tree where he once waited 3 days for a shepherd to return with a promised ram. That was the longest lie I've ever sat through, he says. And the sheep still never showed. When you arrive, the village is halfway into its morning routine. Farmers are hauling water. Children chase each other with sticks. And an old woman is yelling at a goat as if it owes her rent. Zabani is instantly recognized. Some nod in greeting. Others pretend to be busy counting baskets. You get the feeling this is his usual welcome. He sets up in a shaded spot beneath a fig tree and begins unwrapping his clay tablets. Each one has a name, date, and expected contribution. He's not here to punish. He's here to balance. First up is a man named Kuri, whose tax this cycle is 3 measures of beer and 1 goat leg. He arrives with the goat leg raw, heavily salted, and wrapped in reed leaves, but no beer. Had a leak, he mutters. Zabani doesn't flinch. Bring the beer tomorrow. Morning. No excuses. I'll be back. Kuri nods and slinks away. You glance at Zabani's tablet, and he carves a tiny wedge mark beside Kuri's name, white diamond with center dot, meaning partial delivery. The small, efficient, and carries exactly the weight it needs. Here's your historical fact. Field collectors like Zabani were essential in large city-states like Uruk, where distant villages couldn't always send their taxes on time. The collectors didn't just gather goods. They resolved disputes, offered grace periods, and ensured the central record stayed accurate. Without them, the whole tax web might collapse. You meet a woman named Nidinti, a flax weaver. She hands over a bundle of cloth, then adds a handful of onions wrapped in a leaf. For the scribe, she says with a wink. Zabani accepts the onions, carefully weighs the cloth, and marks it delivered. Open debate still exists among scholars about how much leeway field agents had. Were they strictly enforcers, or did they operate with judgment and flexibility? Zabani seems to land firmly in the human first, scribe second camp. If I took everyone's onions, he chuckles, I'd have to open a soup stand. By midday, you've visited 6 houses and collected an impressive array of barley, wool, dried figs, and even a carved wooden spoon, payment in kind for someone's half-share in a sheep they sold last moon. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some collectors, like Zabani, used notched tally sticks in addition to clay tablets. These wooden sticks were split in 2, 1 for the taxpayer, 1 for the scribe. When placed together later, if the notches matched, the record was confirmed. It was Mesopotamian 2-factor authentication, and it even worked in the rain. After a quick lunch, goat leg stew, naturally, you head to the last house. A widow named Shakar, who's known to be struggling. She's supposed to pay in flour, but her storage jar is nearly empty. She offers a tiny jar of preserved dates instead. Zabani studies her carefully, says nothing for a long moment, then accepts the jar. He makes a note on his tablet, but you notice he doesn't mark her as delinquent or even partial. Just date contribution accepted, community value high. You ask why. Because her sons build the irrigation wall, he says. She keeps chickens for 5 families. Her tax is already paid in other ways. It's one of those moments where the dry machinery of bureaucracy cracks open just enough to show its human side. These receipts, these tablets, they're not just cold evidence. Sometimes they're quiet acts of mercy, wrapped in official ink. On the walk back to Uruk, Zabani tells you stories of being bribed with honey, of carrying a goat on his back for 12 miles, of the time someone tried to pay him in future grain, which turned out to be grass seed. And I still gave him a receipt, he adds, because even bad taxes deserve a record. You ask if he ever destroys receipts. He shakes his head. Never. Everyone has a story, even the wrong ones. As the walls of Uruk come into view again, pinkish clay glowing in the late sun, you realize how complex and personal this system really is. It's not just about goods. It's about trust. About people saying, yes, I gave this, and here is my proof. And as you dust the road from your sleeves, you remember Zabani's quiet motto. Clay doesn't lie, but people do. So you better write it down. You wake up to the sound of rhythmic tapping, styluses clicking on clay, like ancient typewriters echoing through the alleyways. Today, you're spending your time with the people behind all those receipts, logs, and official scribbles, the scribal apprentices. At the edge of the temple district is the EDUBBAA, or Tablet House, which sounds cozy, like a bookstore cafe, but in reality is more like a clay-smeared boot camp. It's where young scribes are trained to read, write, calculate, and importantly, not mix up cow with barley in a grain tithe. You slip in as quietly as you can, which is hard when the floor is covered in drying clay slates and the air smells like damp reeds and crushed fig leaves. The moment you enter, a girl named Tilu shushes you. She's maybe 12, sitting cross-legged on the floor, pressing out perfectly even lines with a reed stylus like she was born with it in her hand. Don't interrupt the counting chant, whispers her tutor, a wiry man named Enkidu. Not the famous one who fought monsters, but a different Enkidu who fights bad math and lazy handwriting. You settle into the corner as the chant continues. 1 goat, 2 goats, 3 goats, red clay, dry clay, seal it shut. It's part of a training exercise memorization through rhythm. Scribes didn't just learn the cuneiform signs. They internalized entire lists, formulas, and tax patterns through repetition. It's part school, part musical theater, part light clay warfare. Today's lesson is particularly sleep-deprived. The students must replicate an actual receipt from 3 weeks ago using only a damaged copy and an oral prompt. It's like ancient Sudoku, but instead of numbers, it's goat rations and quantities of fish oil. Tilu nails it. She even includes the decorative mark showing the payment was made with honor. A small star tucked into the corner. Her clay is clean. Her symbols straight. She beams when Enkidu nods his approval. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mesopotamia's scribal schools were among the earliest formal educational systems. And they weren't optional. If your family was wealthy, connected, or ran a business, someone had to learn to write. Clay was power. Literacy was currency. Historians still argue. Enkidu mutters as he corrects another student's wobbly wedge marks. Whether all scribes were elite, or if some were just really patient farmers. He smiles. Doesn't matter. Anyone who could write could survive in ways others couldn't. You spend the rest of the morning watching students make practice receipts. These are fictional transactions, but treated with full seriousness. One boy records a trade of 1 honey cake for 2 frog skins. Another girl meticulously creates a wind tax receipt for a storm that destroyed a barley fence. Her creativity earns her a rare eyebrow raise from Enkidu. And here's your quirky tidbit. Apprentice scribes often had a clay name, a nickname based on their worst mistake. There's a kid here known only as Goatfoot, because he once tried to sign a receipt by pressing his own toe into the clay when the stylus snapped. To this day, people still tease him with hoof prints in his lunch tablet. You try your hand at writing. Enkidu gives you a test slab and a beginner's stylus, blunt and soft, like a preschool crayon. You press awkwardly into the wet clay, trying to write 5 measures of dates paid. No damage verified. It comes out looking like S measures of grapes eat. Some damage terrified. He takes the tablet, reads it, and nods slowly. Poetic. Useless, but poetic. Outside, a shipment of fresh clay arrives. Apprentice scribes rush to help, piling it into bins, smoothing it into sheets, cutting squares for future records. You notice that some sheets are pre-marked with temple stamps. These are official blanks used only for high-level receipts. You reach out to touch one, but Enkidu stops you gently. That's a future goat's alibi. Show respect. The students take a break and share lunch. Dried apples, chickpea patties, and a few salted fish wrapped in reeds. They eat quickly, joking and teasing. One sings a song about a scribe who forgot to record a beer tax and was cursed with eternal thirst. It's catchy. You ask Tilu what she wants to do when she's a full scribe. She grins wide-eyed. I want to work in the temple vault, or write festival scripts, or do the weather tablets, or make king lists, or everything. You believe her. She already has that confident scribal stare, the one that says, I know how much barley you owe, and I will never forget. Later, as the sun slants across the courtyard and the clay starts to harden into tomorrow's homework, the students clean their styluses and stack their tablets on drying racks. Some will be kept, some recycled, some, maybe, will accidentally become historical artifacts discovered 3,000 years later by confused archaeologists wondering why someone owed frog skins to a man named Goatfoot. You walk out with Enkidu, who sighs in relief. No styluses thrown today. That's a win. And you think to yourself how amazing it is, this quiet army of kids, shaping the future with mud and math. Not soldiers, not priests, just scribes, the invisible power behind every king, priest, merchant, and farmer. And in a world built on clay, maybe the ones who write it all down really do rule everything. You've seen receipts written, delivered, filed, and even sung about, but today you're going to watch one be destroyed. Not out of anger, not as punishment, but as an act of closure. The ritual takes place just outside the temple's grain storage complex, in a side courtyard where the walls are cracked from age and sun, and the air smells of dust, dried onions, and maybe a little victory. You're here with a woman named Ashana, a middle-aged temple administrator with strong arms and an expression that says she's definitely not here for your excuses. She's known as the closer, not for her negotiation skills, but because she oversees the final stage of any long-term tax contract, official record retirement. When someone fulfills a multi-year obligation, say, donating surplus barley for 5 seasons or raising temple oxen from calf to cart puller, they get a reward even sweeter than money. Their original tax agreement is destroyed in public. Ashana places the recipient tablet on a small clay pedestal in the courtyard. It's a hefty one, marked with 8 years of grain deliveries from a man named Kababa. Yes, like the ancient beer goddess, but this Kababa is very much mortal and presently watching with pride from the shade. You sit next to him, and he explains how it started as a small barley offering 3 measures during a famine year. Then came the ox feed. Then 4 jars of honey for the spring rites. And finally, a roof repair on the western temple wall. I never missed a season, he says softly, even during the hail year. Here's your historical fact. Receipts for long-term or multi-part contributions were sometimes issued on larger clay tablets and kept in protected temple storage. Once the final obligation was met, these were destroyed or ceremonially buried to signal a complete transaction. Kind of like getting your mortgage burned, but with more chanting. Ashana steps forward. She nods at Kababa, raises a small polished hammer, and taps the tablet once, twice, then breaks it cleanly in half. There's a soft crack and a small puff of clay dust, like ancient breath escaping the record. The halves are then placed in a shallow basket with a bit of barley and incense. A priest lights it, not to burn the clay, which doesn't, really, but to bless the air around it. Kababa bows, receives a smaller summary tablet noting the fulfilled debt, and walks off whistling like a man who's just been erased from the system. in the best possible way. You ask Ashana if people ever fake a fulfillment just to break their tablets early. She laughs, loud and sharp. Try it, and you'll be breaking pots for the next 5 years instead. She shows you a storage nook nearby where in-process tablets are kept, receipts not yet complete, waiting for that final delivery or temple sign-off. Some of them are very old. One, she says, is 19 years in and still missing one ceremonial fish. No one remembers what kind of fish, or why it was ceremonial. Historians still argue whether that tax was symbolic or someone's very weird bribe. She muses. Either way, no fish, no break. You spot a strange object on a nearby ledge, what looks like a shattered tablet glued back together. Ashana picks it up and snorts. Ah yes, a man named Tammuz tried to break his own receipt early. Claimed the seal cracked on its own. I glued it back. Now he has to watch it until he pays his last sheep. Your quirky tidbit for today. There's at least one discovered tablet from the city of Nippur where a tax agreement ends with a sort of flourish, an extra line written sideways that says, "It is done. I can sleep." A scribe's mic drop moment, perhaps. You spend the afternoon walking with Ashana as she does her rounds. One woman presents 2 loaves of temple bread to close her flour dues. Another man brings an entire jar of dried locusts, yes, locusts, as part of a protein tithe. Some gods are picky, she says. Some just want the crunch. At the final stop, a group of clay workers break a massive tablet that tracked bricks donated for a new shrine wall. The mood is jubilant. Children are allowed to strike the final blow, laughing as the clay splits in half with a satisfying pop. They clap. A goat bleats. Somewhere, a scribe updates a copy saying, "Wall complete. Dust achieved." You ask Ashana why breaking the tablet matters so much. Because it ends the story, she says simply. People want closure. A mark that says, "You did your part. Now rest." Otherwise, they carry it forever. And that's it, isn't it? The receipt isn't just proof of payment. It's a little weight you carry, until it's shattered. As the sun dips low, casting long amber shadows across the courtyard, you help sweep the shards into the corner urn. They won't be thrown away, just stored. Quiet, anonymous fragments of once great debts. Tiny pieces of lives fulfilled. You turn to leave, the wind lifting a few grains of incense ash into the air. Behind you, Ashana waves. "Come back next week," she calls. "We're retiring a cartload of reed bundles. It's going to be very exciting." And you smile, because in this world, even a pile of dusty reeds can end with a ceremonial sigh and the soft crack of clay saying, "We're done." You're standing on a rooftop. Not for dramatic effect, though the view is pretty glorious, but because today your guide insists that understanding Mesopotamian receipts isn't complete without seeing how the whole city works as a ledger. And the best way to see that, from above. Your host today is Ely, an elderly but sprightly city planner who seems more interested in urban design than taxation, until he opens his satchel and reveals a tablet labeled, "Drainage Duties, Western Quarter Year of the Long Rains." Yes, it turns out even sewer maintenance had receipts. You squint over the edge. Below you lies a patchwork of rooftops, courtyards, narrow streets, and irrigation ditches, all glowing a muted gold in the morning light. This, Ely says with a sweep of his arm, is the physical spreadsheet. Every canal, every oven, every fish-drying rack is part of the economic web. And every part is taxed. Or should be. He pulls out another tablet, this one organized like a grid, symbols showing zones of the city, their function, and their obligations. You stare at it, then down at the city again. Suddenly it clicks. The urban layout is data. The palace receives tribute. The temples take in offerings. The merchants exchange goods. But underneath it all, a river of accounting. Today's focus is infrastructure taxes, the kind you never see, but always notice when they don't work. Rain gutters, ditches, street sweeping, even mud control. Ely takes you downstairs and into the winding lanes of a middle-class neighborhood, past houses with tiny shrines out front and kids rolling hoops made from bundled reeds. At the edge of the block, he stops to show you a stone-lined drain. "Funded last year," he says proudly. "Paid by 12 households. I have the receipt." Here's your historical fact. Mesopotamian cities collected maintenance taxes, sometimes known as corvée contributions, a mix of labor and material donations used to keep public works running. These payments were often scheduled by season and tracked by neighborhood. You meet one of the homeowners, a young man named Naram, who remembers helping lay the stones. "I gave 1 day of labor and my uncle gave tar," he says. "They gave us a tablet after." He disappears inside and reemerges with the reward. A narrow clay slip, stamped with the city's crest and a date. He's kept it wrapped in cloth for 3 years. "It's better than my marriage contract," he jokes. "That one cracked." Ely leads you through alleys and over low bridges as he explains how cities relied on these localized taxes. You didn't just give to the temple. You gave to your corner. And if you didn't, he taps a chip tile. You got skipped when the road was patched, or the public oven broke, and no one fixed it. That's right, there were social consequences to being tax delinquent, even if they weren't official. You might not get fined, but you'd get left out. No bake day, no flood repair, and certainly no help carrying your barley jars up from the canal. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some districts, a kind of neighborhood receipt totem existed. Basically a communal tablet that listed who didn't help fund the latest project. One of these, found near Lagash, actually features a line that translates to, "Yes, in Lil Nasir. We remember." A passive-aggressive masterpiece in baked clay. At midday, you follow Ely into a small plaza where the public well is being relined with bricks. Workers move in harmony, while a scribe under an awning ticks names off a clay roll as people drop off sand, bricks, water jars, or labor. Every bit is logged, Ely explains. Even that boy just carrying a water jar. He gets half credit. You sit with the scribe for a while, reading the active ledger. One column lists items. One lists names. The final column? Tiny symbols showing fulfillment. A fish for full, a snail for partial, and a broken stick for absent. It's efficient. It's visual. And it's surprisingly polite. Later, you watch as a woman named Ninsatu brings in a bag of pitch for sealing the well walls. The scribe hands her a pre-carved clay slip with today's date and a single symbol, a star. "That's for punctuality," he whispers. "We like her." You ask Ely if these civic taxes were enforced as strictly as temple ones. He grins. "No, but your neighbors enforced them. And believe me, they had long memories." You walk through a neighborhood that didn't pay its dues last year. The streets are uneven. The drains are cracked. A goat is sleeping in a hole where a bench used to be. "This is what happens when the receipts stop," Ely says. "The system doesn't break. It just forgets you." It's a sobering moment. All this time, you've thought of receipts as personal, transactional. But here, they're communal. They represent promises not just between individuals and temples, but between neighbors, streets, and the very bricks that keep rain out of your sandals. As the sun begins to lower, you sit again on the rooftop where your day started. The city hums below, quiet, patient, dusty. And you think about all the people who aren't kings or scribes or priests, but whose tiny acts of payment and maintenance keep the system alive. Someone's reed bundle fixes a wall. Someone's brick seals a drain. Someone's labor smooths a road. And somewhere, a receipt records it all. Not to glorify, not to punish, but simply to say, "This happened. This mattered." You exhale, and it all feels oddly peaceful. Because in a world of uncertainty, maybe the humblest comfort is knowing your name is etched in clay somewhere, next to a fish symbol and the memory of one good day's work. It's just past sunrise, and the air is thick with the smell of hot dust and last night's baked lentils. You're standing at the edge of Uruk's bustling market, but today, you're not shopping. You're investigating one of the most delicate instruments in the ancient tax machine, the traveling trader's receipt. These aren't your standard temple tithe or palace tribute tablets. No, these are the portable, often weather-worn, often intentionally vague bits of clay that merchants carried with them across miles of desert, swamps, and goat-unfriendly mountain passes. A merchant's life was precarious, but without receipts, it was practically suicidal. Your guide for the day is a wiry man named Daganetti, wearing layers of linen, a sun-scorched headscarf, and a deeply suspicious frown. "Traders lie," he says immediately. "That's our job. But receipts, those don't." You follow him through a maze of stalls overflowing with baskets of garlic, dried fish, bright blue lapis beads, and extremely loud birds in woven cages. He pauses beside a booth selling clay tablets. Not new ones, used ones. Some chipped, some blank, some still sealed. "That's our version of prepaid postage," he jokes. "Buy a receipt. Fill in the details later." Here's your historical fact. Traders in Mesopotamia often traveled with pre-inscribed blank receipt tablets, especially when they were fulfilling known tax or tribute obligations in far-off cities. They would carry a receipt for anticipated payment, then update or confirm it upon arrival with a local scribe or temple official. Dagonetti reaches into his satchel and pulls out one such tablet, oval with a cord hole running through it. "This one's from a trade I did in Sapar. It says I owe 2 sacks of sesame, but I already gave them." He points to the reverse where a local seal is pressed, confirmation by a temple agent. "See? I'm clean." He's not always so lucky. One time, he says, a goat chewed his tax receipt while he slept. Tried to explain that to the magistrate. He asked if the goat could come testify. You both laugh, but it's a nervous laugh because there's real risk in carrying fragile clay as your legal protection. That's why, over time, Mesopotamian traders developed innovations to keep their receipts safer. Some carried envelopes, clay shells over smaller tablets like an ancient bubble wrap. Others used wax coatings, or even attached receipts to bundles with string and hardened seals. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some receipts doubled as maps. A tablet might include a line noting, "Paid in Lagash, West Quarter, second stall past fish seller," which not only proved payment but gave the drop location in case of disputes. Yes, the first GPS was wedge-shaped and breakable. Dagonetti introduces you to another merchant, an older woman named Ashur Maliktu, who trades in honey and goats. She pulls a sealed pouch from her belt, opens it carefully, and lays out her entire collection of receipts like playing cards. One of them catches your eye. It's shaped like a small disc with a single symbol, a jug with a fishtail. She grins. "Fish honey." You blink. "It's a joke," she says. "Bad honey from a trader once smelled like fish. I still made him pay full price. This receipt? Proof I didn't murder him." Despite the relaxed tone, there's tension underneath. Traveling traders paid taxes at multiple checkpoints, sometimes honestly, sometimes creatively. But if you were caught without a receipt, the best you could hope for was confiscation. The worst? Being charged as a smuggler or tribute dodger. Historians still argue, Dagonetti mutters, whether the checkpoints were official or just local strongmen with seal stamps. Either way, you needed something in clay to get through alive. By midday, you're in a caravanserai, basically an ancient truck stop. Camels, donkeys, merchants, and yes, the occasional sheep all buzz with activity. A clerk under a shaded awning is issuing travel tax receipts to new arrivals. A man steps forward. 2 bolts of dyed wool, he says. The clerk asks, "With or without border fee?" "With, and I already paid half in kish." "Proof." The man hands over a flattened slip. The clerk squints, reads it, nods, and issues a fresh receipt. "Paid kish border. Balance Uruk gate due. Stamped. Sealed. Done." You ask the clerk how many traders try to cheat the system. He raises an eyebrow. "Most," he says. "But most of them are bad at lying. And that's the thing. These receipts weren't just about recording taxes. They were about narratives. Who owed what, when, where, and whether they could prove it with flair. Some scribes even added little jokes or prayers to the margins. One tablet ends with, "May your sesame stay dry and your goats stay in one place." You wander back to the market square as the sun begins to slide toward the horizon. Dagonetti shows you one last receipt. A cracked tablet with only 2 signs visible, "Paid" and "Flood." "It was the year everything washed away," he says softly. "Temple let us defer. That little sign." He taps it. "That's why I'm still in business." You realize then, every receipt is a survival story. A clay lifeline across deserts and danger. A way of saying, I did what I promised. I was there. And in a world where a single wrong step could cost your livelihood, or your life, those tiny, portable tablets mattered more than gold. You part ways with Dagonetti near the spice stalls. He offers you a piece of candied tamarind and says, keep your promises, and keep your receipts. Wise words. You're walking along the banks of the Euphrates now, where the city's clay-rich shoreline curls like a sleeping cat beneath the temple walls. The river murmurs, soft and steady, and behind you, birds circle the rooftops like they've got debts to settle with the fishmongers. This morning's lesson, the legacy of all that clay. You've spent days learning how the Mesopotamians used receipts. But what happened after? Where did they go? Who kept them? Who lost them? And who, thousands of years later, would find them? You're meeting Ninu, an archivist, or rather, a clay keeper. She doesn't call herself a scribe, though she knows all the same signs. Her job is more vertical, because her workplace isn't a room. It's a stack. You follow her into a dusty chamber beneath the outer temple. It's surprisingly cool down here, and lined from floor to ceiling with shelves made of beaten wood and sun-fired bricks. Each shelf holds rows of clay tablets, some wrapped in reed matting, some sealed with wax, some just bare and cracked with age. This, she says, is where receipts go to sleep. Welcome to the archive. Here's your historical fact. Large Mesopotamian institutions maintained vast clay archives, often organized by reign, region, and type of transaction. Some records were temporary and recycled, while others, especially land grants, legal contracts, and complex tax documents, were kept for generations. Ninu guides you past one shelf labeled, Barley Tithes Year of the White Fish. She smiles. We don't know why the fish was white, but it must have been important. She shows you a favorite tablet, a temple receipt for 30 sheep delivered during a solar eclipse. At the bottom, the scribe had added a simple plea, may light return quickly. There's both data and drama, baked into the clay. Then there's the vault. It's not flashy, just a sealed room with the thickest walls you've seen yet. Inside, the permanent records, land transfers, oath receipts, multi-generational tax logs that track who owed what from grandfather to grandson. One tablet is over a foot long and details the barley owed by 3 brothers across 10 years. It includes birth signs, inheritance clauses, and quirky tidbit, an argument over whether a goat could count as partial payment if it had an unfriendly face. Ninu snorts. Apparently it scared children. The priest refused it. You ask how these archives were maintained. By obsession, she says, and interns. She pulls out a smaller tablet, one used to catalog other receipts. It's essentially a clay index. We even have receipts for receipts. Meta-taxation at its finest. But not all records stay safe. Some are deliberately destroyed, others simply lost. She shows you a bin of fragmentary tablets. Shards recovered from collapsed walls, burned shelves, or panicked scribes who tried to hide mistakes during regime changes. One such piece reads only, paid in haste. Witness ran away. Historians still argue, she says, whether that was war, theft, or someone just really embarrassed about shortchanging the temple. You sit in a quiet corner and study a line of tablets from the reign of a king you've never heard of. The writing is still crisp, cool, and slightly rough beneath your fingertips. There's a receipt for straw, a log of copper nails, a payment of 2 cured fish and 1 ceremonial shoe. These records outlived everyone who wrote them, Ninu says softly, and the people they were written for, and the people who found them later. You pause, because here's the strange, peaceful truth. A tax receipt, the humblest of documents, might be the only reason we remember a person existed at all. No grand tomb, no statue, just a clay mark saying, this person gave 10 reeds to help patch a temple roof. And somehow that's enough. You walk with Ninu to a final room. Inside are modern scribes, archaeologists she calls them, with brushes and magnifying lenses. They're gently cleaning clay fragments from a dig site outside Nippur. One man gasps. He's found a seal. The tablet says, 15 locust jars, 3rd moon, Overseer Nabutu. The archaeologist smiles. That's the earliest mention of Nabutu we've seen. Just like that, a life breathes again. Back upstairs, you stand once more by the Euphrates. The river glimmers. The sun is fading. The wind picks up clay dust and carries it across the water like ancient whispers. You close your eyes, and you realize that, in the end, these receipts weren't just about payments. They were quiet memorials. Ordinary people immortalized in dried earth. A bricklayer's name, a midwife's offering, a boy's single jar of oil. All remembered because someone took the time to press it into clay. And now, so do you. By now, you've followed the receipt from birth to burial, from the moment it's scratched into fresh clay under a reed awning, to its place of rest in an archive or shattered fragment in a ceremonial urn. But tonight, your journey ends in a place both strange and somehow inevitable. The storytelling house. You're not sure what to expect. It's a quiet building near the edge of the temple quarter, low and shadowed by date palms. Inside, woven mats line the walls, oil lamps flicker gently, and an old man with a cloud of white hair sits surrounded by children, elders, and, curiously, several donkeys who have poked their heads through the windows to listen. Your host tonight is Lugal Namti, a professional storyteller. His job isn't to teach exactly. It's to remember and sometimes to take dry facts like harvest logs and tribute payments and turn them into something more human. Tonight's story? The man who lost his receipt. He starts in a low voice, half singing, half muttering. In the year of the 3 frogs, in the shadow of the old barley gate, there lived a man who paid his taxes, but could not prove it. You chuckle. So do the children. But everyone listens closely. The tale unfolds. The man is named Elushu. He delivers a massive bundle of reeds to the temple. He bows, he smiles, he even offers a jar of fermented turnip brine. But the scribe is sick that day. The tablet isn't sealed. And by the time the priests demand proof, the bundle is long gone, used to repair a sacred bench. Elushu is dragged before the city officials. "Where is your receipt?" they ask. He protests. He pleads. He insists the bench itself is the proof. "Then bring the bench," they say. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Disputes over unpaid taxes were common in Mesopotamia, and the receipt system, despite being advanced, was far from flawless. When receipts went missing, witnesses, secondary seals, and personal reputation all played crucial roles in resolving the issue. In the story, Elushu's neighbors stand up for him. One woman remembers him limping home after delivering the reeds. A child says she saw him drying his tunic from the rain that fell that day. Even the donkey, yes, the same donkey from earlier in the story, testifies by refusing to eat from a bundle of stolen reeds. Finally, the priests relent. A new receipt is issued, with a triple stamp and a note at the bottom. Reeds delivered. Donkey confirmed. Everyone laughs. The old man bows slightly. He begins a new story, but your mind lingers. Because behind the humor is something real. In a world ruled by clay and seal, when records failed, memory stepped in. Communities filled the gaps. Testimony mattered. Stories saved lives. Here's your quirky tidbit. At least 2 ancient tablets have been found with lines clearly added after the fact, reading something like, "confirmed by temple cook," or "verified after dispute." These were real scribal edits, corrections to reflect human reality. You sit with Lugal Namti after the story's end. The room clears out slowly, save for one stubborn donkey still listening like it's the best episode yet. You ask him if all his tales are real. He shrugs. "They're true enough," he says. "Truth isn't just in tablets. Sometimes it's in the spaces between them." Outside, the stars bloom quietly across the sky. You walk the now familiar streets of Uruk. Past the archives, the market, the clay pits, the temple towers, the sleepy goat with the sour expression. Everywhere, stories and receipts are interwoven. A farmer places a jar at a doorstep and gets a nod in return. Somewhere, a child dreams of becoming a scribe. Somewhere else, a forgotten receipt lies beneath the floorboards, waiting to be found. Because in this world, there is no such thing as just a tax. Every record is a fingerprint. Every mark is a whisper. Every receipt is a piece of someone's life, frozen in clay and waiting, perhaps for you, to bring it back to life. And so, as the breeze stirs the palm trees and your eyelids begin to grow heavy, you feel the weight of that simple truth. To write something down is to make it real. To stamp it in clay is to make it last. And to remember it, even in story, is to make it live again. Word count: 1,100. Wind down, final 300 words. Let your breath settle now, slow and steady. You've walked sun-baked roads, felt the press of styluses against clay, listened to inkless scribes capture entire economies with nothing more than a wedge and a patient hand. You've seen temple steps dusted with barley chaff and watched taxes get paid in onions, fish, or bundles of goose feathers. And yet, through it all, there was a quiet rhythm. A world where things had weight, meaning, and record, but not noise. A world where people remembered what you gave, not just what you owed. Where even broken tablets whispered your name into the centuries. Now, close your eyes if you haven't already. Picture the river moving slowly, the moon above it pale and wide. Somewhere, a jar of sesame oil rests beside a small receipt. It says, "Delivered. Enough. No alarms. No stamps. No fines. Just clay. Just proof that someone showed up, did their part, and was seen." May you feel the same tonight. Rested, recorded, and complete in your own quiet way. Sleep gently now,